This is not a story of a military victory. It is a story of absolute human dignity, a narrative about a small group of starved, forgotten, and abandoned young men and women who stood up against the world's most fearsome military machine. They knew they could not win. They knew survival was a mathematical impossibility. Yet, they fought. As one of the last surviving commanders later said, they simply wanted to choose the manner of their own death. This is their unforgettable story. In November 1940, the Nazi regime sealed off a small, historic Jewish quarter in the heart of Warsaw, Poland. They built high brick walls topped with barbed wire and shattered glass, completely cutting it off from the rest of the city. Into this tiny area, measuring just 1.3 square miles, the Nazis crammed over 400,000 Jewish men, women, and children. The calculation was simple: destruction through attrition. The daily food ration allotted to Jews was a mere 180 calories. Starvation became a weapon. Typhus and other diseases ran rampant through the overcrowded apartments. Every single month, thousands of people died in the streets from hunger and cold. Yet, the true horror was still to come. In the summer of 1942, the Nazis launched what they called the Grossaktion Warszawa, the Great Action of Warsaw, between July and September of that year. Under the guise of resettlement to the east, Nazi forces systematically deported over 265,000 Jews from the ghetto directly to the gas chambers of the Treblinka extermination camp. By the time the deportations paused in the autumn of 1942, the vibrant community of 400,000 had been reduced to a ghost town of roughly 60,000 survivors. Most of them were young, able-bodied workers kept alive for slave labor. But these survivors had learned a devastating truth. They now knew exactly what resettlement meant. They realized that the trains only went one way, to death. And in that dark realization, a fierce, desperate vow was born. They decided that if they were going to die, they would die fighting. With nothing left to lose, the youth of the ghetto began to organize. They formed a secret resistance, divided into two primary underground paramilitary groups. The first and largest group was the ZOB, which stands for Żydowska Organizacja Bojowa, or the Jewish Combat Organization. Led by a charismatic, deeply idealistic 24-year-old named Mordechai Anielewicz. The ZOB was comprised mostly of leftist, socialist, and Zionist youth movements. These were young students and activists. They lacked military experience, and they had very few connections to the outside world, but they possessed an unbreakable ideological discipline. The second group was the ZZW, the Jewish Military Union, led by Paweł Frankel and Leon Rodel. The ZZW was made up of right-wing revisionist Zionists and, crucially, former Jewish officers who had served in the Polish army before the war. Because of their military backgrounds, the ZZW was better organized, better disciplined, and possessed direct lifelines to right-wing Polish resistance groups outside the walls. Despite their deep political and ideological differences, as the Nazi threat loomed, these two factions realized they shared one common destiny. They divided the ghetto into combat sectors and prepared for an inevitable final showdown. Securing weapons inside a sealed concrete perimeter was a deadly enterprise. The main Polish resistance, known as the Home Army, or Armia Krajowa, was initially highly skeptical. They worried that sending precious firearms into the ghetto was a waste, believing the Jews would not or could not fight. But after seeing the fierce determination of the youth, the Polish underground began to smuggle in small batches of pistols and ammunition. The rest of the arsenal was bought on the black market. Using hidden gold, diamonds, and family heirlooms left behind by those who had been deported, resistance members bribed corrupt German soldiers and Polish police officers for rifles and bullets. Every single weapon had to be smuggled past the heavily guarded gates. The resistance used garbage trucks, carts carrying dead bodies, and most importantly, the city's complex, toxic sewer system. Young Jewish children, often called the sewer rats, risked their lives daily, crawling through miles of pitch black, freezing waste to carry ammunition back into the ghetto. For those inside, these children were heroes. But weapons were only half the battle. The insurgents knew they could not stand face to face against German tanks on open streets, so they changed the battlefield. They turned the Warsaw Ghetto into a massive subterranean fortress. Underneath the apartment blocks, they dug over 600 heavily fortified bunkers. These were not primitive holes in the ground. Many were sophisticated engineering marvels, equipped with electricity tapped secretly from the city grid, fresh water wells, ventilation shafts, and months of dried food supplies. Furthermore, the fighters knocked through the interior walls of adjacent attics and cellars. This allowed combat teams to move across entire city blocks completely unseen, popping up to launch surprise attacks and vanishing before the enemy could retaliate. The moment of truth arrived on the morning of the 19th of April, 1943. It was the eve of Passover, the Jewish holiday of liberation. The Nazi leadership in Berlin had ordered the final, total liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto as a holiday gift for Heinrich Himmler. At 4 o'clock in the morning, 2,000 heavily armed SS troops, backed by tanks, armored cars, and artillery, marched through the ghetto gates. The streets were dead silent. The buildings seemed completely abandoned. The German commanders expected a routine operation, believing the remaining Jews would surrender out of fear. They walked directly into a trap. As the German columns reached the center of the ghetto, the silence was shattered. A massive barrage of homemade Molotov cocktails, hand grenades, and small arms fire rained down on them from upper floor windows, rooftops, and basement slits. The sudden, synchronized attack caught the SS completely off guard. An armored car and a tank were set on fire, sending waves of panic through the German ranks. For the first time in the war, Nazi troops were forced to retreat in disarray from a population they considered defenseless. Hearing of this humiliating defeat, Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler were furious. They immediately sacked the initial commander and replaced him with SS General Juergen Stroop, a ruthless officer specialized in brutal counterinsurgency warfare. General Stroop quickly realized that traditional urban warfare would cost too many German lives because the Jewish fighters knew every corner of the ghetto. So, he chose a terrifyingly simple strategy. If he couldn't conquer the buildings, he would burn them all to the ground. The Germans adopted a scorched earth policy. Armed with flamethrowers and incendiary devices, SS troops systematically went from street to street, setting every single structure on fire. The Warsaw Ghetto became an ocean of flames. The air temperature rose so high that the plaster on the outer walls melted, and the asphalt on the streets bubbled. The conditions inside the underground bunkers became unbearable. As the buildings collapsed above them, oxygen was sucked out, suffocating thousands of civilians alive. In a desperate bid for survival, men, women, and children began jumping from the windows of burning multi-story buildings, preferring a quick death on the pavement over being consumed by the fire or captured by the SS. Despite the apocalyptic inferno, the resistance refused to lay down their arms. One of the most intense battles took place at Muranowski Square, led by the ZZW. On the roof of a dominant building, the fighters raised two flags, the blue and white Zionist banner and the red and white Polish national flag. These flags could be seen clearly from the outside, non-Jewish side of Warsaw. They served as a powerful message to the citizens of Warsaw and the world. We are fighting, we are alive, and we are defending our freedom. General Stroop viewed these flags as a personal insult and ordered continuous assaults, losing many soldiers before his troops finally managed to tear them down. By early May, the ghetto had been reduced to a smoking wasteland of rubble and ash. The resistance was running out of food, water, and ammunition. On May 8, the Germans finally discovered the location of the central command bunker of the ZOB, located at number 18, Mila Street. Inside this massive underground complex were over 300 people, including the commander Mordecai Anielowitz, his girlfriend Mira Fukler, and dozens of top resistance fighters. The Germans surrounded all the exits and demanded an immediate surrender. When the fighters refused, the SS pumped toxic gas and explosives into the entrance shafts. Realizing that the end had come, and determined never to give the Nazis the satisfaction of capturing them alive, Anielowitz and his core group of fighters made a tragic, final choice. They embraced each other and committed mass suicide. A few managed to escape through a hidden exit that the Germans had missed, but the spiritual heart of the uprising was broken. A week later, on the 16th of May, 1943, General Stroop decided to officially mark his victory. He ordered the complete destruction of the Great Synagogue of Warsaw, a magnificent building located just outside the ghetto walls. At precisely 8:15 in the evening, the building was blown up. Stroop sent a proud, typewritten report to Berlin with the infamous title, "The Jewish Quarter of Warsaw is no more." But Juergen Stroop was wrong. The ghetto was destroyed, but its spirit survived. Even after the official declaration of victory, isolated groups of Jewish fighters remained hidden in the ruins, launching hit-and-run guerrilla attacks against German patrols well into the summer of 1943. A handful of fighters managed to escape through the sewers in the final days of the burning ghetto, aided by brave Polish lookouts on the outside. Among them was Marek Edelman, the deputy commander who took over after Anielewicz's death. These survivors did not stop fighting. Just over a year later, in August 1944, they picked up weapons once again to fight alongside the Polish Home Army in the massive Warsaw Uprising, continuing their war against Nazi tyranny. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising held out for nearly 4 weeks longer than many sovereign European nations managed to resist the Nazi blitzkrieg. It stands as a monumental testament to the power of the human spirit. These young men and women did not fight for territory, nor did they fight with the hope of military victory. They fought for history. They fought so that the world would know they did not go to their deaths willingly, but as human beings with dignity, honor, and courage.